Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Hello, Kentuckiana. You're on 970 AM. You're listening to a show called Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and also the Louisville Tea Party. On this conservative show, we try to present conservative news and opinion for the Louisville listeners. And if you support that effort, we would love for you to join in our efforts by financially supporting this program. So let me just lead off right with that. You can go to kyvoice.org. That's kyvoice.org on your web browser. And that will have a lot of the viewing options that I'm going to talk about as we go forward, as well as a link that will allow you to donate. If you want to text into the program or you want to get a link to donate, you can do that through text at 502-571-0970. Just text KY space voice or give, and a link will pop up and you can go on your phone and give that way. Okay, so what are your viewing options? You're probably listening to us right now on 970 AM. We also have a live stream that's going right now on Facebook Live as well as on YouTube. You can find either of those options by searching for Kentucky's Voice or the KY Voice. We also maintain an X account that is at the KY Voice. So all of those are options that you can find some of the videos posted later, especially the YouTube channel where you can see all of our archive video. If you want to see any of the clips from past shows, I encourage you to do that. So just go to YouTube, search for Kentucky's Voice, and start browsing around there. You'll find some interesting content. We also do a rebroadcast of this podcast on TV on Channel 21. If you have Spectrum, that's Channel 21. And those are usually rebroadcast at 12:30, 4, and 8 p.m. the day of the show. So I encourage you to catch that on your TV. We have an exciting show for you today. Later in the show, the last maybe half of the show, I'm going to be joined by one of my favorite politicians, State Rep Josh Calloway from District 10. And we will go through a lot of the bills that he's filed this session and get his impressions of what's going on. We'll also actually address a little bit of national news. In particular, right after the break, we're going to talk about the U.S.-backed Mexican military operation against one of the leaders of a cartel. So this is actually likely to have a bigger impact on you from a potential retribution standpoint in terms of maybe some terrorist actions than even the Venezuela attack that happened a couple months ago that we talked about on the show. So we'll talk about that in our first segment. We'll get into some of the details, and I'll try to give you all the back information about that you need to know. And then the rest of the show, we're going to be talking about state politics. We'll go through some of the drama that happened very recently in the Kentucky Senate. We'll talk about some good and bad legislation that Josh Calloway isn't directly primary sponsoring anyway. And then the last half, we're going to address a lot of his bills and talk maybe even briefly about his reelection campaign. So we have an exciting show up ahead. Again, I just want to run through those options. Search for Kentucky's Voice on either Facebook or YouTube to see a live stream, and then on YouTube, a rebroadcast of the show into clips. You can also reach us on X at the KY Voice. You can text us at 502-571-0970, and you can go to the website to get links to a lot of those things that I just referenced, and that's kyvoice.org, kyvoice.org in your web browser. And then finally, we also have a rebroadcast on television. We're blessed through WBNA to rebroadcast the show on television if you have Spectrum on Channel 21 at 12:30, 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. So, again, I encourage you to join us after the break where we'll talk about some international and national level politics, and the rest of the show we're going to talk about things that probably actually impact you more on a daily basis. Join us right after a quick break. Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson. I hope you're bundled up inside because it is cold outside. Speaking of cold, the Olympic Games just concluded, at least the winter portion of that, in Italy, somewhere near Milan, Italy. And I just want to give a shout out to the U.S. men's hockey team. They actually ended a drought that had occurred since 1980, the Miracle on Ice team that you probably have seen maybe a movie about. The U.S. had not won gold in men's hockey in Olympic competition for 46 years until this year they won in overtime. So if you're watching our podcast live stream, we've got an image up of the White House basically replying to Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, the former Prime Minister of Canada, had posted last year, "You can't take our country and you can't take our game," i.e. hockey. And so the White House, basically trolling them back, posted an image of an eagle on top of and basically killing a Canadian goose on top of an iced over lake. So this caused a little bit of controversy online. But nevertheless, I thought it was a great image. And if you followed this White House at all or President Trump, you knew that was coming, something like that. The U.S. ultimately finished second in the overall Olympic standings behind Norway. However, the U.S. won more golds than they ever have in a Winter Olympics. Their previous high was 10. They won 12 total golds with both the women's hockey team and the men's hockey team in the premier events of the Winter Olympics, both earning gold for the first time ever. Okay, and other types of international news. There was a military operation by the Mexican government against one of the most prominent drug cartel leaderships in Mexico. The name of that cartel has a couple of names, but usually it's referred to as the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or abbreviated as CJNG. I will just call it the Jalisco Cartel. Let me go quickly to a video of about a minute of CNN breaking down what happened in this operation.
Violence erupted in several Mexican states after El Mencho, leader and founder of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, died following a Mexican military operation. The cartel became one of the most powerful and ruthless criminal organizations inside Mexico, according to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. Security forces from several federal branches of Mexico's military carried out the operation in the town of Tapalpa. It triggered a series of violent events across the country, with suspected members of organized crime groups setting vehicles on fire, blocking roads in the area, and clashing with authorities. Jalisco Governor Pablo Lemus Navarro reported. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum praised the work of the agencies involved in the mission, writing in a statement on X, "We work every day for peace, security, justice, and the well-being of Mexico."
Okay, I thought that was a great, very quick summary by CNN. Basically, the Mexican government decided to try to take out the leadership of one of the most prominent cartels in Mexico. The U.S. provided information and logistical support, but there were no boots on the ground, to be clear. That can often be seen as an act of war if the U.S. were to send boots in, even with the approval of the Mexican government, and actually have active participation. So usually that's frowned upon. Ultimately, what that joint operation took care of is they took out the longtime leader of the Jalisco cartel. His name was Nemesco Asiguero Cervantes, also known as El Mencho, which apparently is some sort of Mexican slang for like a barbarian. The raid, which the U.S. provided information to facilitate, was carried out in the Mexican city of Tapalpa. That's in the province of Jalisco, and that's basically where the name of that cartel comes from. It was basically taking down the leadership of one of the most notorious criminal organizations in the world, and it set off a firestorm of violence, basically reprisals from the lower level of that cartel. And likely over the coming weeks, there will be a lot of violence in the streets of Mexico as they sort out new leadership, and maybe some of the other cartels try to take territory as they sense weakness from one of the two biggest cartels in Mexico. So let me give you a little bit of background on this cartel. If we could pop up an image of Mexico that shows kind of cartel control of the various areas of Mexico. Now, on the radio, you can't see that, but if you want to go to, again, our YouTube channel on Kentucky's Voice and see the video, you'll see a stretch basically through the middle from left to right of Mexico that runs just north of Mexico City and covers the most prominent city being Guadalajara, that was largely under the control of this Jalisco cartel. The Jalisco cartel is actually a splinter of the Sinaloa cartel, which a lot of people have probably heard about. Sinaloa basically controls most of the northern Mexican part along the Pacific coast. And so basically from Guadalajara north and then from the middle of Mexico to the west, Sinaloa largely controls, and south of that, all the way stretching over kind of into that panhandle area of Mexico, was largely controlled by this Jalisco cartel. So in 2010, this group, this Jalisco cartel, basically was a splinter group from Sinaloa. So Sinaloa continues to operate, but El Mencho basically took a faction of the Sinaloa cartel and started his own cartel. He was notorious as possibly the most ruthless leader of any of these cartels. He blended both kind of sophisticated business tactics and hiding of money, as well as extreme violence, and most notably, like the ultra-militarization of the cartels. They basically operated much like U.S. Special Forces groups, or they took cues. They basically upgraded the militarization of these cartels, including smuggling over 50 cal rifles, grenade launchers. They formed improvised armored vehicles like the U.S. military uses, that, like mini tanks basically to transport people so that they couldn't be attacked. They actually shot down with the surface-to-air missile one of the Mexican Army's helicopters as part of this escalation. What that has done is it's basically been a challenge to the Mexican government's authority, and that kind of sparked the new president. She's been president, I think, for 2 years, Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, to actually make a play to basically reestablish Mexican control over this ultra-militarized cartel. Now, this cartel, the Jalisco cartel's operations extend far beyond what you think of as traditional drug trafficking. It's a multifaceted criminal empire. Yes, it produces and distributes methamphetamine, meth, and also fentanyl, which we've heard a lot. They basically get the precursors to both of those chemicals. They mix it. They get those from China, arguably with the support of the Chinese government, or at least the Chinese government not stopping the shipping of those precursors to Mexico. They mix it up with their chemists and they smuggle it over the border. If you've seen the show Breaking Bad, that was a different cartel they were portraying, but it's basically the same sort of operation. Now, those drugs, if you know anything about meth and fentanyl, those have kind of devastated Kentucky over the last probably decade. I guess you can make the argument. Fentanyl is a type of synthetic opioid, so you've probably heard a lot about opioid deaths in Kentucky. That's not all, however. They basically have branched out into human smuggling. They have exploited migrants by charging huge fees to smuggle them over the border. Sometimes they've kidnapped them. They've engaged in forced labor of those people that they smuggled over the border. There are many instances of systematic rape of female people that they smuggle over the border. They control key areas like Jalisco and Colima, and the U.S. has long targeted this guy. He had a $10 million bounty on his head from the FBI in order to try to facilitate his capture. So what happens when you take out the head of one of these large cartels? Basically, the cartel gunman immediately is basically to set up they set up roadblocks, they burn vehicles and businesses. In the clip that we showed from CNN, you saw pictures of multiple vehicles being burned outside of a Costco warehouse in Mexico. So they are attacking U.S. business interests as well, basically as reprisals. It was chaos. There's video online if you want to find it, of basically people not being able to leave the country. They shut down some of the airports. The U.S. Embassy issued a shelter-in-place advisory. They canceled a lot of the flights to the U.S. But nevertheless, like the White House, and I think a lot of people view this as a major victory against fentanyl trafficking, which they've really been focusing on. That was part of the excuse for invading Venezuela, but Venezuela doesn't produce a lot of fentanyl nor smuggle it, if we're being honest. However, these Mexican drug cartels are the primary people that are smuggling fentanyl over. So what does it mean? I think there's going to be chaos, but it also is a great statement about the ability of Mexico and the U.S. government to cooperate in tackling some of these dangerous organizations. Join us after the break, and we'll talk about Kentucky politics.
Online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. Find both of those organizations on Facebook if you would like. I want to encourage you to follow the Kentucky's Voice, like and follow on Kentucky's Voice YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Kentucky's Voice. Like and subscribe. That will allow you to get notifications whenever new videos are posted. We do a radio show pretty much every Monday through Friday. And we have great hosts and great guests. And if you're interested in conservative talk that affects Kentucky and Louisville, I encourage you to like and subscribe so you can keep up with what's going on. All right, in this next segment, before we're joined by Josh Calloway, hopefully for our final two sections, we're going to talk about some of the other goings-on in the Kentucky General Assembly. We're a little over halfway through the Kentucky General Assembly at this point. If you watched my show last week, and feel free to find that on the YouTube channel, we went through all of the Republican filed constitutional amendments to this point, and we talked about probably 15 other bills that are significant that have either passed the Senate already or passed the House already, or some other legislation that hasn't quite moved but really needs to start moving if we're going to get it passed this session. Now, and we haven't had a lot of commentary on the budget. We probably still won't address that much, but we're going to talk a little bit about some other legislation in this segment and then leading into discussion with Josh Calloway. So one of the bills that I want to talk about that has now passed the Senate, it passed on completely partisan lines. There are 32 Republican senators and there are 6 Democrat senators in the Kentucky General Assembly, the Kentucky legislature. So that's the level of Republican dominance that has overtaken the state at the General Assembly level. One of those bills that passed just this past week, I believe it passed on Thursday out of the Senate on 32-6 margins, completely partisan, is a bill that's been known as the HALO Act. This is SB 104. If you want to go to legislature.ky.gov and search for the bill so you can look through it. It was sponsored by a this is his first term, relatively new senator by the name of Matt Nunn from the Georgetown area, just north of Lexington. And I think the spirit of the law is good, but in my personal opinion, the Republicans should not at this point have advanced that bill. I don't actually think at this point it is a bill that protects our liberties. So what the bill does is a general rule of thumb, as a general summary, is that whenever there is a first responder engaged in an action, that could be an EMT dealing with a person that's bleeding on the street. It could be a police officer that's dealing with an arrest or making an arrest. There has to be a 25-foot radius. If people that are standing around, bystanders or protesters, are asked to move back, they need to move back to at least 25 feet from any of the first responders that are involved in this situation. Now, I'll talk a little bit at the end about why I don't love this bill, but there was a lot of drama concerning this bill. After the bill had essentially already been taken, there was some commentary by a Republican senator by the name of Philip Wheeler from Pikeville. And so if our producer could load that first video.
You know, we've heard a lot of rhetoric on this floor today about some of the things going on and, you know, people's right to protest. I agree. This is America. You have a right to protest. But you do not have a right to intervene in a law enforcement action or a first responder performing his duty. It is as simple as that. You know, we've seen some tragic things happen in other states, and they are tragedies. Anytime there's a loss of life, it's a tragedy. But there's a real simple rule that you can follow and avoid all of this. If you comply, you don't die. I mean, if you don't insert yourself into a law enforcement officer that is performing his duty, that is already a highly tense situation, you're going to be just fine. You can stand 25 feet away, blow your air horn, act like what kind of idiot you want to act like. There's nothing in this bill that says you can't do that. Nothing. Nothing. You know? And, you know, your cash from, you know, all these organizations funded by George Soros and other people, it'll still cash. You can still be your paid protester. This bill, yeah, these no votes, that's absolutely against law enforcement. It's absolutely against first responders. Make no doubt about it. That's exactly what a no vote on this bill is. And I want to thank the senator from Scott for standing up for our law enforcement and first responders here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. They at least know that there's 32 elephants in the room and that they're going to stand with them no matter what some people in this country want to do to make their lives, even put their lives more in danger and make their lives harder. Thank you.
Now, the criticism of the bill from the opposite side, and I share a lot of these criticisms, is that this bill has a potential to be used to silence peaceful assembly, the rights of a free press, and basically the filming of any of the incidents that are going on around some of these heated situations. All right. Now, I don't disagree that there should be some sort of radius where first responders can basically not be interfered with or intervened with. And so let me go ahead and get some video of the Democrats voicing the opposition to this. Go ahead and play that, and I'll talk about it afterward.
There have been several cases that have been well documented in the last several weeks where police officers have actually kept first responders from responding to patients in need. Doctors on the street that say, this person is shot, let me help them. And the police officers have declined, have not allowed them. And the statement, if you comply, you do not die, sickens me to the core. To the core. Because if you go back in history, they marched people into gas chambers. They were complying, and they died. And to say that will never happen again, that could not happen here, that will not happen here, I don't know how delusional you can be. Because, guys, it is starting to happen here. I am so proud of my no vote. And I really think that the people in this room do not understand what's happening in this country at this point. Thank you.
Senator. Sat here and was not planning on speaking, but I do think it is very important to get up and speak about the reason why this is a no vote today. And we've heard from some of my colleagues that we already have laws on the books that would address these issues if someone is impeding in the work of law enforcement or of our emergency management folks. And I want to be very clear that this no vote is not a no against those individuals or those entities. And I also want to be very clear on this day, February 19th, the 19th day of Black History Month, the disrespect to Black Kentuckians, the disrespect to Black Americans. We just talked about the life and legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson and the things that people have done to say that if you comply, you don't die, or whatever the words were saying, is a huge disrespect. And as a Black woman that is in this body, I will not tolerate such disrespect, especially during this Black History Month. Thank you.
Okay, the two women that you heard speaking at the end were Louisville senators. That was Karen Berg and Keturah Herron. They were voicing Democrat opposition, some of which was unhinged. I think Keturah Herron's was not unhinged. I wouldn't characterize it that way. Right after the break, I will quickly talk about my thoughts on that and how it lowered the discourse, but we'll be joined afterwards by Josh Calloway.
At kyvoice.org.
All right, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson. I'm going to be joined in just a moment with Representative Josh Calloway, one of my favorite legislators, but I do want to briefly talk about that HALO Act in the discussion. My opposition to the HALO Act is that 25 feet is too far. There are many situations where you're not able to accurately video an altercation because the surroundings will not allow you to get a decent angle when you have to be 25 feet from whatever the situation is. The other concern I have is the people that are doing crowd control are also first responders. They're usually cops. So does 25 feet from the first responders that are asking you to move back, doesn't that mean that's 50 feet from a situation? And now we're really talking about how you can't actually see what's going on and document it to make sure that basically we hold our first responders accountable. And everyone agrees that first responders are heroes. They need space in order to get their job done. And it is absolutely, if you are physically impeding or you are harming those first responders in any way, that's already against the law. But I have no problem with adding the HALO Act in as Kentucky law, as long as we are thoroughly protecting our First Amendment. Now, the discussion from Philip Wheeler, I thought it started off very good. I thought, even great. But then as he went on, he just continued to take dig after dig at the Democrats, including if you voted against this bill, what you're doing is you're voting against law enforcement and you're voting against first responders. Basically, you don't care about any of these people. Then he was implying that all protesters are funded by George Soros. I have no idea whether George Soros has funded any of that, but even if he has, that's not most of the protesters. So that started the conversation down a very negative road. Then Karen Berg, as she is wont to do, had some unhinged remarks implying that we're on the course to gas chambers, basically Nazi gas chambers. So there's no room for rhetoric like that. I mean, that's ridiculous. Nothing like that is happening, nor should it. Nor should we even be implying that anything like that is happening. What that does is it minimizes the atrocities that happened in the Holocaust. And then Keturah Herron, I thought, in general, had a relatively reasonable response. However, no one was trying to make this into a racial issue, and that wasn't part of the discussion at all. And in her comments about this being Black History Month, it took the discussion that way. So that's just an example of how the discourse in the General Assembly can really start to spiral downward, and we can move from making good policy to taking personal digs and trying to get political wins or something just over unhinged rhetoric on both sides. And so I personally, in its current form, do not support that act, but with some modifications that do a little bit more to protect First Amendment, I could come around to supporting it when it gets over to the House. Okay. I am joined now by Representative Josh Calloway from District 10, which is Breckinridge County and a good portion of western Hardin County, so just west of E-Town. Josh Calloway is one of my favorite legislators. Let me go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to come on, and excited about what y'all are doing here, getting good conservative truth out to the people. And so it's a really good thing. I appreciate what y'all are doing.
All right, and we appreciate what you do up in Frankfurt. So, Josh Calloway, let me just hop right into the bill since we don't have a ton of time. HB 296 is one of the more interesting bills that I think you filed this time. This is about dealing with psychotropic drugs, and psychotropic drugs are drugs that alter your brain chemistry and alter your thinking. You know, things like maybe Ritalin or Adderall, or you can talk about, and just tell me a little bit more about that bill, what motivated, what's it trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so a lot of what has taken place in our society today is a lot of times children are children, and because of the family structure and because of especially with Medicaid and people that are on government-funded subsidies, there's an immediate push to get them on some type of medication to slow them down, to speed them up. So I started doing some research and found out that almost 10,000 children that are on Medicaid in the state of Kentucky under the age of 5 are on some type of antidepressant in the state of Kentucky. And as I begin to look at it, I've talked to parents, talked to guardians, and people that maybe are fostering children, and come to find out, a lot of times they really don't understand what the problems are with some of these drugs and the side effects of them, and how addictive they are, and how that they could lead to a lifetime of addiction. Right. And so I just filed this bill to make sure that we did informed consent beyond just a simple conversation, but a sign off by the parent or guardian, a requirement by the prescribing physician to go over everything, especially the black box type language that are associated with those drugs, and make sure that they understand before they put their child or the foster child, whatever it may be, on those drugs, that they know what they're doing and they know what the end result can be. Right. And it's a passion of mine. Our society is not sober in so many ways, and we need our young people to be sober. They need to be able to be children. They need to be taught and taught how to act right and to behave right. And there is a need sometimes for these types of things. I just want to make sure that the parent or guardian understands what they're doing whenever they get them prescribed to their child.
Absolutely. I think it's a common sense piece of legislation, and it's a problem that does not get nearly enough attention or discussion in common society. I remember when I was growing up, basically the boys ran all over the place and were wild. The girls tended to be a little bit more well-behaved. Now you go into some of these elementary schools and the boys are zombies. They're on all kinds of these medications where, I don't know, it's supposed to basically address what's normal male behavior through medication. And so the percentage of our children that are already on these psychoactive, psychotropic drugs is astronomical. And so if nothing
100,000 kids on Medicaid in the state.
That's just Medicaid.
And let me say this too. And I don't have the data to prove this, so some people would probably say I shouldn't say this yet. Yeah. And I don't know that I can get it. But one thing we do know, that there's a greater percentage of kids that are on Medicaid that are on these types of drugs versus people that are on private pay or self-pay. Yeah. And it is a money funneling industry, and it's an opportunity for everybody to share the wealth and get these kids on these types of drugs. And again, I can't get private pay information, because of HIPAA laws, but we do know that is a fact.
Yep. All right. Let me zoom down a little bit and talk about a couple more bills. I know at least one of these, maybe both of these you filed in past sessions, but these are more directly related to constituent concerns. Mm-hmm. So HB 311 is about railroad crossings. What does this accomplish, and what was the genesis? Why did this become an issue you cared about?
So I was actually approached by Representative Nancy Tate. She came to me, and when we did redistricting, she introduced me to a new constituent of mine, a lady by the name of Tanya Cerna. And Tanya sat down with me and began to tell me her story and what had happened. She had a teenage son who was riding in a vehicle with someone else. They were driving down the road, came across a railroad crossing that didn't have any cross arms or anything of that nature, and ended up getting struck by a train, and he got tragically killed. And what they found as they began to do the investigation, one of the contributing factors was vegetation had grown up across both directions of this railroad crossing. And so she actually started a foundation called Hunter's Purpose. Her son's name was Hunter, and she began to advocate for railroad safety. And we filed this bill, and basically what it would do, it would require the railroads to make sure that vegetation is cleared 300 feet in both directions of that railroad crossing, so that if somebody has their radio on, or they can't hear, whatever, distracted a little bit, they have clear visibility to make sure when they cross that crossing that it is safe, there's no train coming. And Tanya has been a force of nature for this bill. She's been in Frankfurt. She actually just retired. She's been up there every week talking to legislators. We built a strong coalition. I will say that the railroads try to operate like a fourth branch of government. And so we are trying to negotiate with them right now, but we do give them hundreds of millions of dollars in our budget for safety purposes and other things. I'm not a reg guy, but I also believe that if we're going to give you money from the government, we should be able to tell you how to spend that money. So we're trying to get this bill across the finish line this session.
All right. A simple bill, maybe negotiation on distances, 300, 200, all those things, all the sausage. That's how the sausage gets made. I'm sure you're willing to negotiate like that. But let's get this in front of a committee and have some discussion.
Right.
Same with that first bill. All right. The next one is somewhat similar, but more economically related. HB 423 is about motorsports facilities, especially in rural areas.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what that bill does. What's the goal?
So I had a track in my area, a drag strip, and they approached me and connected me with a national group called PRI. And basically what it does, if they are already existing in their community, it gives them a 5-mile protection so that somebody couldn't move into the community, decide they didn't like the noise, or decide that it was too distracting for them and tried to hold them liable and sue them for that. So it's really just a protection bill so that if they are already meeting existing ordinances and permitted to do what they're doing, somebody new can't come in, or new ordinances can't come in and create some legal liability for them.
Okay. All right, we're coming up on the end of this segment. After the break, we're going to continue with Josh Callaway, who is one of my favorite state legislators up there. If they want to, and we'll join this after the break when you talk about it. If someone wants to find more about you and your election campaign, what's the website they go to?
It's joshcallawayky.com.
Okay, joshcallawayky.com. Find more about his platform and the things he's interested in. We'll join us right after the break.
Org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. You're listening to us on 970 AM, or you're watching our Facebook live stream or YouTube live stream at Kentucky's Voice. Be sure to go to that YouTube space and search for Kentucky's Voice to see past episodes. And then when we clip up this video, you'll be able to watch this in segments and bite-sized segments. All right, we're joined with Josh Callaway, one of my favorite legislators in the Kentucky General Assembly. He represents Breckinridge County and a little bit of Hardin, the western part of Hardin County. He talked about 3 bills that he had primary sponsored this time. One of the focuses that Josh Callaway has had since he was up there is basically protecting the innocence of children, and I think he's filed 2 bills, or he's co-sponsored 1 bill and primary sponsored a bill that deal with that. So the first one, and we'll have a little bit of disagreement about this, but he's a very hardliner. and everyone should be a hardliner in stopping sexual abuse of children.
Yes.
Let's be very obvious about
Yes.
that. So tell me a little bit about what HB 399 does. And I'll have a little bit of commentary. We won't get in a fight on the air.
No,
Go
that's
ahead.
great. We've had this discussion many times before, and I know where you stand. You know
Yep.
where I stand, and we both take our position for the same reason.
Exactly.
You know, so that's why it's not really a point of conflict.
Yeah.
We both want to address the same thing, and that is to make sure that children are not sexually abused.
Absolutely.
And so what this bill does, it just adds another option in for the judge for first-degree sexual assault, that the judge, if the child is under the age of 12, could give the option for the death penalty. And it's simply meant to be a deterrent. That's the whole point of it. And we've tried to attack this issue from many angles. We have the grooming bill, House Bill 4, that was passed already this session out of the House. And so we're trying to look at every angle to make sure that predators are addressed, they're caught before they offend, and that we protect children at all costs, in the womb and out of the womb. Both of those, they're innocent, and we have to protect them. So that's what this bill does. It just gives that option for capital punishment for the judge.
Yeah. And so just to be clear, we're talking about first-degree rape, sodomy, and sexual abuse of children, I think under the age of 12, you
Yes.
said. Obviously, horrendous crimes. There's no argument whatsoever. My only point is that this exceeds that Old Testament Lex Talionis, eye for an eye. As horrible as these crimes are, they are not capital offenses. They are not killing these children. They are traumatizing them beyond belief. These children will go through years of recovery. I don't want to minimize in any sense how horrible these crimes are. My position, however, is that we should only have the state allowed to have capital punishment in cases where a death occurred, an actual murder occurred. But anyway, I think both of our hearts, and especially I know Josh Calloway's heart, is in the right place here, and these are horrendous crimes that require. He also got a little bit into HB 4, which we talked about on last week's episode. Find that on YouTube. And that was a prohibition or making it criminal to engage in grooming activity.
Right.
And so we talked about that last time, but grooming is just basically an older person preying on a young person and basically not engaging in sexual activity with that person under the age of 18, but setting them up to set up a relationship.
And can I say something about that? Because, you know, we get pushback sometimes over the craziest things.
Yeah.
But I want it to be clear that it doesn't matter if it's a school teacher, a coach, a police officer, or a pastor, or a Sunday school teacher, or a youth director. It doesn't matter. In every sector of society, we have predators, and we understand that.
That's right.
And so a lot of times you hear about specific things that make news from a certain sector of society, but all of the above should be punished to the fullest extent of the law, and we got to make sure our laws allow that to happen. But it doesn't really matter who they are and where they come from in society. It's wrong across the board.
Absolutely. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I'm virtually positive it's not going to get a vote this cycle, this upcoming bill. That's HB 690. I just want to bring it up. We don't have to have this fight also. But this is HB 690 is a Prenatal Equal Protection Act. It basically involves regarding an unborn child as at the same level as any other child. And the consequence would be abortion would be essentially considered murder. Do you want to just talk very briefly about this bill?
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. So it does work on our fetal homicide section of the law. And it just says if we believe abortion is murder, then we treat that unborn baby the same way we would if anybody else got killed.
Right, absolutely. The spirit of, I think his heart's in the right place. Ideologically, I like it. The sticking point for most people is, do we want to start prosecuting doctors for things like murder? And I actually got a text from a text line, and they were talking about the prescribing of those psychotropic medications to children. And the question was basically, aren't the doctors also responsible? Should they be criminally charged? I know in any of this legislation, when we start moving into charging doctors, that becomes a sticking point that we can't get those bills over the finish line. But I think our listeners understand, what his logic is, and I think it's fairly sound logic. It's just that always is a barrier when you start
do you get
crossing
through that? Yeah.
Exactly. How do you get through that barrier? All right. Another bill that you filed is on gender transition services. This is HB 553. Last session, I believe, a bill that related to this was passed. So what's the difference between what passed last time and what passed this time?
So I actually filed this same bill last session. And
and before we even get in, tell me what gender transition services actually means. That's a euphemism. What are we talking about here?
Yeah. So, it would be anything that affirmed, whether it be by means of counseling, by means of medication, or by surgery.
Okay.
So that's what gender transition services would entail. Anything that is affirming, whether it be prescribed medication, surgeries, or counseling, one-way counseling, for someone to transition. And so I filed it last session. What that bill simply says is that no tax dollars can be used for gender transitions for anybody, minors and or adults, and that no state health plans or government-funded health plans can allow for this to take place. Now, when we say government funded, we also have to understand that's us.
That's right.
That's taxpayer funded. So what we did last session, we went to the cabinet and the Bashir administration. We began to discuss that we were hearing it was going on in prisons, that we were paying for people's gender transition in prison. They said it wasn't happening. Then they came back in November of that year and said, well, it's happening, but not very often. Then they came back and said, okay, it's 62 people that we're paying for. So all of those people were getting it paid for by Medicaid. But at the same time, when I filed this bill, they also sent me an impact statement and said that we were going to end transition services for 12 to 15,000 people. So I began to dig and try to find out what was going on, and what it was state and local government health plans that we were paying for this. So when we passed the bill last session, we really fixed about 0.5% of the problem. I got an email from the Kentucky LRC the other day, and they said, if we stop paying for this, we will save the taxpayer well over $500,000 just like that by ending our paying for these types of services. I don't think taxpayers should be on the hook for this type of thing at all, and I think most taxpayers would agree with me on that.
No, I think you're right, and again, I think you explained it quite well. What an adult decides to do in terms of, and I regard abortion as affecting another person. So let's be clear about that. But what you decide to do with yourself as an adult, I don't mind. That's not really something that I want to focus on. I'm not going to say that everything that adult making a decision for themselves that I agree with it 100%, but that's fine. But when it's involving my money, and that means taxpayer money, that comes with a lot of restrictions.
Right.
And I don't agree with any of these crazy things where people are cutting off their genitals, or even just the general ideology of pretending that a man is a woman and a woman is a man, which makes no sense. That's not biological reality. And so taxpayer funding money, and he just said over $500,000 right there is being used of taxpayer money in order to support some of this nonsense. And it is nonsense.
That's it.
So another bill that you filed, and this one I guess is a little spicy. We did get the 10 Commandments monument reinstated on the state capitol grounds. It's not in the buildings, but it's off in a little garden area. You filed a bill that would mandate the display of the 10 Commandments in school. What's the logic behind that bill? That is HB 670, I believe.
Well, this is the thing. All throughout history, we have seen an attack on factual history.
Yeah.
And so what this bill does, and I understand this from a faith standpoint. You know me well enough to know
right.
how I believe. But the Ten Commandments were a foundational document in the founding of this country. We had our laws, our moral laws, our societal laws were built upon that.
Sure.
Up until several decades ago, they were taught in history class as a part of how this nation was founded. And so what this bill does is, from a historical standpoint, it allows for a couple things. It allows for 10 commandments to be brought up in history class and taught from a historical perspective.
Right.
And then it would cause the 10 commandments to be posted in each classroom with those historical sightings on them, so that young people can know this is where we came from. This is how we got here. This is how our system was built.
Right. And so some people are like, is this imposing religion? First, it's not imposing religion. This actually occurred in the United States up until around 1960, maybe 1956. This was common practice. And the Supreme Court has basically said, as long as we are presenting these as historical documents, not imposing our religion in a public school on children, that this is acceptable. And so Texas actually has passed a law similar to this. I don't think that there are constitutional issues. It's just a question of, is this right for Kentucky? All right. So let me just give another shout out. If you want to support Josh Calloway in his re-election campaign, go to joshcallawayky.com. I also want to give a shout out to Steve Doan. Doan4ky.com. We forgot to mention his website when he was on a couple days. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.